want to welcome again everybody to another episode of Prodigy Search Presents. It's a terrific honor, privilege to have today someone that doesn't need introduction. Everybody in the business knows Abe, but formality-wise, Abe Madkour, who's publisher, executive editor of Sports Business Journal, Sports Business Daily, their affiliated ventures along with that. We'll get into that in a minute. Named publisher, I guess, a little over a year ago, Abe, I think it was,
Yes.
overseeing all the business units there. What I want to talk about is, we'll get to it a little later, but been there since the inception, been there since 1994 as a young professional. I'm going to ask some of those questions a little later because some of the alumni that you guys were hanging around in a Victorian house with is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So
Done your research.
talk about that in a minute. But just off the top, Abe, I want to congratulate you and your team. I thought you did a phenomenal job of segueing out of the unfortunate cancellation of World Congress of Sport, which is the preeminent conference in the industry. I mean, over nearly 1,000 people, seniors level of executives across the business have always gone and looked forward to going, especially in Southern California. But your ability to, and what you guys did to pivot and adapt off that, and coming up with your virtual, World Congress comes to you, I thought it was phenomenal, Abe. And you guys deserve a lot of credit for how you put that off. And just wanted to, obviously the cancellation was inevitably an obvious one, but tell us a little bit about how you pivoted off that and how you executed.
Sure. Well, first, it's good to see you. You look good. Thanks for having me on. Always a big fan of yours, Scott, and it's always fun being with you at industry events, and we'll get back to those hopefully somewhere down the road.
Well, thank you.
Let's see, around March 12th, I mean, we knew we were going to have to cancel that event, unfortunately, that was scheduled for Dana Point, California. And we knew, though, if we canceled it, Scott, we did not want to just say it's canceled. So it was, what are we going to do? And we were pushed hard by our board and our CEO to let's try to really turn this into a virtual event, try to do that on the exact date of the Congress because people had already kind of held those dates. And at first I was a little skeptical. I was all in, but I was just like, this is going to be hard. We got to go out there and find a platform. We got to convince speakers that this is going to be viable. We got to try to transfer registrations from the live event to a virtual event. We've got to talk to sponsors about how we're going to give them credit, but also give them exposure in this virtual experience. So we luckily had a team that was really we left a room. I remember on that March 11th, we messaged pretty quickly to everybody that it was postponed, but we were doing a series of virtual events. We did 4 in 6 weeks.
But March 11th, I remember that day just because I was in Buffalo and we had talked before we started about our relationship with Delaware North, and I was up at Delaware North's offices. So it hadn't really totally shut down at that point, but it was getting close where you guys are out in front realizing, I guess you had to move it.
We saw California was close to basically putting a stay at home. They had already prevented gatherings, I think, Scott, of more than 200. So we just knew that we weren't going to be able to do anything in California. In addition, our title partner in this event is CAA Sports. And, through their guidance and counsel, they were like, the state's moving quickly towards shutting everything down. In 2 weeks, we won't be able to do this event. And so that really, I wish I could say we were ahead of it. We weren't. We were probably about 2 days behind, but it all worked out well. It worked out fine. But, I mean, it was difficult because we really wanted to try to execute and maintain an integrity of the live event. And when I started getting emails, even from people close that I'm with in the business, Scott, saying, why haven't you guys canceled this yet? That kind of made me realize that we've got to move quick.
Yeah. Well, again, I think you did a great job. I sat in on the 4 different segments. I think it was 4. You had 4 different segments. I thought, I don't know if that was mostly taped. There was some live. I don't know how you did it, but again, I thought, and I'm not being overly gratuitous, Abe. I just thought the production, the look, the continuity, the guests were vibrant as if you're sitting in a big ballroom like you would in Dana Point. I thought you did a terrific job of it.
Thanks. I mean, I think we all have heard businesses talk about shifting and pivoting, and we learned something there, Scott. We learned that we can do this. We learned that people will attend. We learned that people will be part of it and network. And we plan to make these a part of our business for the foreseeable future. So we're going to stick with this. We're going to do them throughout 2020. Are they as viable as a live event? No, not yet. But, it is an alternative, and it's a way to keep us in the marketplace. It's a way for us to bring people together, and it's a way for our brand to remain top of mind and relevant. So we're going to keep doing them.
I was going to ask you that because and we hear it all the time, right? The world and the work from home and how's that shifting business as a whole, our industry. I mean, obviously the live event industry, and when you get back to, hopefully some type of norm. I mean, you're face to face. But I was going to ask you that, and as the success coming off that, and a lot of different, video conferencing and use of Zoom like we're doing right now, and so forth. Your desire, appetite to do forms of that again, and you just answered that.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I'll just be a realist. Let's look at our business. Two prongs of our three-prong revenue streams have really shut down: advertising and conferences. Our circulation, our subscription business for Sports Business Journal and Sports Business Daily has been great, has stayed to budget, and our budgets are very, very ambitious. I think it's proven the value of our content now more than ever. So the content piece has been very, very steady. So the subscription business is a good business to be in, recurring revenue. But I mean, advertising, Scott, just stopped. Conferences just stopped. So what we're trying to do is I'm working like you are. I'm working harder than ever. We're all working harder than ever at our shop to try to just figure out where we can move to where maybe there is some revenue, where we can use this time to build a pipeline. So on the other side of this, we're really ready to go. We are trying to talk to clients more and more frequently about what they need right now. So we're starting to see, some traction around webinars and some things that we're doing pretty quickly to just try to maintain some value. But no doubt about it, the revenue streams have dried up in a couple of areas.
And that's the challenge, and again, as we look at our business in terms of, because again, we were talking offline before we started about many sports organizations, which is core of what we do, although we've clearly, diverse, got some diversity off that, but, are not selling the beers and the hot dogs and the tickets and the sponsorship and putting 50,000 people in stadiums and refunding all that. And so, the crunches on that and I was going to talk to you a little bit about that, as you and your staff have done a great job with the publications and talking about, the prognostication and coming out of this and playing in empty arenas and stadiums and the impact of that and the challenges to reinvent, right? We like we're trying to be as creative as you can, reinvent ourselves. And reinvent may not be the right word, but looking for the revenue streams like we're all going to be faced with, right? What's new and what's the new normal? So, and you touched on, Abe, as I transition in, I want to talk a little bit about what you're hearing, but what I thought you've done a good job on, but I want to talk to you a little bit about, the balance on your publications between covering COVID and all the challenges in the industry and against live events. That's clearly what you guys do in terms of the media live events, and covering kind of the non-COVID as you still look at that. It was going on, NASCAR coming back this weekend and so forth and so on. How you've consciously had your staff, look at that, covering the important news while covering the kind of the normal mainstream news.
Yeah, I would say that everything's intertwined right now, Scott. I mean, no reporter's approaching a story without addressing the impact of the current situation. And I've gotten no pushback from readers or subscribers like, hey, you're going too deep on COVID-19, because it's really touching. It's a thread through everything we do. Right. Now, we could do a profile of someone, but the profile to me has to be some sort of recognition or relevance to what the situation is right now and maybe how they're dealing with this. We are doing profiles of businesses that are changing or pivoting like we've talked about, which are of interest. We've heard a lot of people reach out to us, Scott. I found this interesting. People who want examples or lessons of businesses who have made their businesses more relevant right now and somehow made their businesses being able to be a revenue grabber where there's really some revenue to be had. Like, where are they finding spots where they can stake a flag and kind of win some business? So we're getting a lot of questions about that. So right now, even though it's been 9 weeks in for us, it's still largely COVID-19 related in some manner. I will say that, we decided immediately, I think the week of March 15th or so, to go out with a nightly newsletter that was free to everybody, that was outside our paywall, that was going to just touch on all things that we're hearing related to the sports business and COVID-19. Very well received. And I think that that's also taught us, Scott, that we can probably put together, we've always wanted to be in the freemium space, like some sort of free product, because everything else we do is behind a paywall.
Right.
So this allows us to get outside our paywall and get some more people to experience our product, and maybe build a database of new names who we've never reached out to before. But to your original question, everything is going to be like, even with the sports returning, with UFC last week, with NASCAR this week, with the PGA Tour in June, everything is still with a lens on how they're doing it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting.
And the steps they're taking.
And one more question, going back, and then I want to talk about what you're hearing and what your prognostication in terms of your, the discussions you have on a daily basis. But how has readership been? I mean, you look at, I got to imagine that you talked about, that end of the business being strong. I mean, people are home, working from home, have more time to consume. I'm consuming it a lot more. I often would have, a couple of weeks backlog and then catch up, but I'm on top of it. Has readership been stronger, and you increased the subscription rate?
Well, our engagement has been higher than higher than a long time. We were up. Let me use April as an example. So April, for example, compared to April of 2019, Scott, our engagement metrics online were north of 25% higher. Okay,
wow.
We had the most audio listens, the most podcast listens than we've ever had, and 1 month of April was higher than the first 3 months combined of January, February, and March of 2020. So you're right. People, that's where I get the content's doing fine, but the advertising and the conference revenue right now aren't there. So luckily we've been able to kind of really maintain one leg of that three-legged stool. We just got to get through to the other side to be ready on the end.
You talk about, because you guys and your staff are talking to people in the industry every day. How are what's the sense of the mood? And I don't mean to be trite, because there's a lot of, scary, unprecedented, no playbook things going on daily, right? And things are changing daily, if not weekly. But what's the general feel, although probably too broad of a question?
No, I think you hit it though, Scott. I think it changes by the day and by the week. I can tell you, we're recording this on, what's today, May 14th. This week's felt a little bit more encouraging than any so far, both on the commercial side, but also in the conversations I'm having with people on the sports side. They sense that there's we're seeing the progress between MLS and NBA training facilities opening. We saw the UFC last week. We see NASCAR this week. So we're starting to see some signs. We're hearing that Adam will make a decision, Silver, I'm talking about, within the next 2 to 4 weeks. That'll be a huge indicator. I think baseball will start to see some sort of, viewpoint toward their road ahead. So I'm starting to, not last week, I remember talking to one very high level league executive, and they were quite pessimistic. They were like, I just don't see how we come back. So it does change pretty quickly. I think the accessibility of the testing has really changed some people's frame of mind. They feel like they are able now to get the test and not put them in harm's way of other people getting tests that are needed. And they feel that they can actually manage this process. So they feel better about that.
I know you've had some polls too, and it's been interesting because people talk about, do you think the NBA will come back or should come back and finish their season, even if it takes them through September? The NHL says the same. I talked to somebody at the NHL the other day, and they're literally having meetings every day and talking with the teams, once or twice a week, playing through September and then restarting or starting the new season in December. So, and some people, seen some players saying, forget it, let's drop it. It's time away from our families. We're going to get housed up. There's so many different scenarios. But I think, again, I'd love to get your pulse on it. The positivity still out there, the desire to restart and finish the seasons.
I think that it depends on who's leading their respective leagues. I go back to your old league, the NHL. I found Gary Bettman to be one of the most I would say, consistent. That Commissioner Bettman's been pretty clear that they're going to play hockey. The NHL's coming back. Okay,
Right.
they're gonna crown a champion. They don't know the schedule. They don't know when. But Gary's been very, to me, we haven't talked, but reading everything he said and watching him in all his interviews, very clear. Adam, I think Adam's been pretty clear too. He's not sure. Adam's been pretty transparent. Like, he's going to wait and see what the data shows them. He is very close to his players and his members. And if his players say that they don't want to play, I think that would be a very interesting decision that Adam would try to have to sell to ownership. I do know a number of NBA owners who I've talked to who are, we've got to get going. We've got to play. We've got to play soon. So there's a real push and pull there for ownership. You saw Dana White, who's the most ardent, he's going to come back. And Dana White doesn't care what the public thinks about whether he was reckless or whether he was smart. But he'll come, and he did come back. If you go down, the interesting one for me is Rob Manfred. I think that, I've written this before. I've said it publicly. I mean, I like Rob. I think that though he is probably the most, he's below radar. He hasn't been as public as, say, Gary or Adam in meeting the media and saying his message. And he's also probably been the most polarizing in terms of media treatment. Like, a lot of the media don't understand, like, what is the Manfred plan here? Do they want to come back?
Right.
Is he just using this as a negotiating tool for a new CBA? Like, what is baseball's plan? And from talking to people at high levels of baseball, I really think that there's a sense that maybe owners would be happy with just 70 games and a postseason and go from there. And, they're in no hurry to get back, as I guess was what I'm saying.
And then you get into players, and I haven't gotten great depth with the players saying, well, wait a minute, the revenue share, and the owners are saying, we're not going to have people in the buildings, perhaps the entire season, or if so, a very limited number. And the players are saying, not so sure. So that's an interesting, and how that plays out negatively, neutrally, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting.
You nailed it, because right now, I mean, you don't see that happening with the NBPA and the NBA. They're getting along quite well.
Right.
Even Gary Bettman, I mean, he's done a great job, I think, very smart. And this return to play committee is both memberships of the Players Association and the league. They're meeting all the time. So they're on the same page. But you see it with baseball, it seems very antagonistic. We know how strong the baseball union is. You hear Scott Boras saying players have made a deal already, that you have to live by the deal we've already made. So this could get, it's May 15th. It's going to get a little bit interesting in terms of compensation.
But that's what we were talking about earlier. There's got to be a pivot. I mean, I understand, and look, I'm not going to question any of the leadership on the union side of baseball or the administrative side of baseball, but you got to have a pivot. You made a decision in March. Well, we know in 2 months, a lot has changed. So it's interesting to see how that one will ultimately shake out.
And I think baseball, as you know, Scott, I mean, it is just such a part of America's summer consciousness that it really, like, everybody's looking at baseball. And that's why I think the stakes are higher for Rob Manfred and Tony Clark, because really, I mean, they won't happen. But if the NHL said we're done, the public would be bummed. But it wouldn't have the impact of saying we're not having baseball at all this year. Again, saying that, I do think the NBA comes back. I think the NHL comes back. I think baseball comes back.
Well, it's interesting too, because I've spent, as you pointed out, I've over 20 years in the NHL, but it's almost, maybe it's a bad use of phrase, but appointment viewing, right? So you think NHL has the playoffs, awards the cup in June. NBA has the playoffs, their season awards the champion in June. Then you're into baseball, the summer, to your point. Then you go into NFL training camps. Now we're saying there'll be hockey going on probably, or theoretically in August, September, NBA. And so my mind says, an old guy says, wait a minute, my appointment viewing says that's just got to grasp that. And again, we're living in an unknown world these days. So I guess that's just the norm.
But for anybody watching and for you and I, it could change the way the sports cadence goes from ever.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we've heard about the NBA always wanting to start their season after Christmas. Maybe this is the impetus to do that.
Right.
If these leagues get pushed back, it could start a whole nother sports calendar, Scott.
It's fascinating. We can go on forever about
Yeah.
it. Is there anything, Abe, as you guys have talked, and I know the media side, but is there anything that surprised you? I mean, again, that may be too broad and too trite of a question, but you look back in these 2 months, which seems like forever. It doesn't, I mean, 2 months is a long time, but boy, does it seem like a long time. Anything surprised you? Or have you heard anything that says, wow? And that may be unfair.
No, I think that what I've been fascinated to watch is just the different approaches and philosophies of leadership. And so that we kind of just went through them there about how certain commissioners are leading, and I would say how certain leaders of respective sports are putting their kind of flags in the ground and basically showing, what their intentions are. I think that that's been fascinating to watch, and I think that that does kind of mesh to their personalities. So, I think that what you're going to see, though, it's still early, and I felt this a little bit, Scott. I don't know how you feel, but the hardest parts are still to come, I think, specifically
Yeah.
for businesses. And so I'm keeping an eye. So what's surprising me a little bit is the sports entities, the sports companies, the sports teams and organizations that are over leveraged, that have a high level of debt. They're going to be very vulnerable and very susceptible to a long-term recession or a long-term downturn. And they may not be prepared to really last through this. So that's something that I'm really keeping an eye on, because I don't want to say names, but there are some big companies in the sports business that, Scott, may look really different on the other side of this.
On the
And
brand side, Abe, or across all different?
Across all, I think you're looking at, potential teams,
Yeah.
certainly sports agencies, large sports organizations, teams that have owners with not very deep pockets who are very over leveraged. They're not built for a long-term recession. I think that, and I've said this, so I'm not saying anything out of school. Like, if I'm an MLS, the MLS teams in Cincinnati, Nashville, the plan for Austin, those are tough because you're just getting going or you have plans to get going. And if you're a team that just got started and your entire revenue model is really dependent on the gate revenue, Scott, as you know, and you're not getting any of that gate revenue,
Yeah.
and if they don't come back, I think they will, but if they come back in a different environment and the economics are different, your whole economic payment structure and your debt covenants and your debt payments are going to be more challenging. And that's going to be difficult for people to withstand.
Yeah, and again, into our industry, but humans as a whole, the impact from staffing and people, and if you launch and you've got games in stadiums that are impacting so many people, right? I mean, and again, it's not just sport; it's the millions of people, small retail, small business, small restaurants. I mean, everything else that it's impacting, but it's going to be interesting where it comes out on I hate to call it the back end, but where it evolves.
I'll say what has surprised me, the ardent focus of the NFL to just basically say maybe they're lucky because they're not missing games and their games aren't postponed, they're not suspended. But like, I got to give Roger Goodell. I mean, he basically said, we're going to continue with our off-season hell or high water. We're going to do free agency. We're going to do the draft. We're going to do the schedule release. And I can tell you, Scott, there are a lot of people I talked to who thought that those three were big mistakes. And he went with them. And they really turned out. I mean, the draft was a huge hit for the NFL, I thought, and unbelievably executed. And I thought that was a great indication of how sports really came together, because like you had the NFL Network work with ESPN. That doesn't happen a ton. You had just other people really come together. So the NFL has been very interesting to watch during this, I thought.
I thought they the draft was a great job and probably set the bar or set the notion that there's no reason that can't continue. The NHL talked about their draft in June, staying on schedule or even moving that up. But I think the NFL did a phenomenal job at executing that. And obviously great ratings because there was nothing else to watch.
The ratings are going to be huge for sports, right?
Yeah. I want to, and we could talk forever on that, Abe, but I want to keep, on our timeline. But I'm fascinated, and I want to talk a little bit. I don't want to embarrass you, but the whole growth of started with the Daily in 1994. You launched the magazine in 1999. You were a young professional in 94. And, you look at that, and it may have been more than this, but boy, it's impressive to look at your alumni. I mean, yourself and where you've gone, but Jeffrey Pollock, I think David Aberton, perhaps a little known Chuck Todd,
Right.
As a young pro in Washington, D.C., and what he's gone on to do at NBC and Meet the Press, etc. I mean, what an impressive guy. I'd love to know just a little bit about the launch. And I know you had spent time a little bit with the Washington Bullets and I think the Baltimore Orioles and then in 94. Tell us a little bit about that story because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is a fun, fascinating story. I think I was 24 or something, and I was living in Washington, D.C., and I was working for a U.S. senator, and I knew I didn't want to stay in politics. And luckily, senators have connections. And I think a lesson for anybody I've told is like, don't ever hesitate to use your connections because, that's what sports is, a who you know business, as you know, Scott, well. So he was able to put a call for me to the Bullets at that time. You're right. So I started interning for the Washington Bullets. Then I did some interning for the Baltimore Orioles. Then I read about this startup publication that was going to be called Sports Business Daily. And I interviewed with a guy named Jeffrey Pollock. And again, 24, I think, and it was the summer of 94. That was the strike season, so baseball stopped, so I wasn't going to Baltimore anymore, and I took a pretty significant pay cut. I don't want to say, because I was already making this much, and it got down to even lower. Yeah. But you're right. In that room every morning at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, it was Chuck Todd, who was part of this group already. He was working on a political publication at that time, but shifted over to this sports publication. Jeffrey Pollock was the publisher, and David Aberton was our marketing director. And David's gone on to great things, NHL, IMG, and now at Bruin Sports Capital. Chuck Todd we see every Sunday on Meet the Press. So, and Pollock just was at the XFL running that league until it shuttered. But really an interesting group.
Was it the four of you? I mean, was there other, younger staff?
Yeah, no, there were some other people, and some have gone on to other areas outside of sports. The true genius, who I thought was the real brain, Jeffrey was very, very smart, but there was another gentleman. He now is just a stay-at-home dad in Massachusetts, but he was really the editorial kind of visionary behind it. And then Sports Business Daily got acquired by Street and Smith in 1998 to coincide with the launch of the print product. And so it's been fun to see everything kind of come together.
Well, I remember back in '94 when you started, I was in Los Angeles working for the Kings, and I remember, and I think you came out at noon Eastern, which was 9 o'clock in LA, and I remember you waited by the fax machine because I think it was delivered by a fax, and we get it, and probably don't want to hear this, but we made copies and circulated to a few. Although our staff was smaller than it is in today's world, and I remember those days. I mean, you guys did a great job and sustained it. 26 years later, you're still cranking it.
Well, I think one of the things, real quickly, was that it was novel and different and unique, and no one had seen anybody aggregate news from all these markets at one time. And like, look at you at 9 a.m., you could read this publication and you knew everything that was going on in the business by 9 a.m. You really did. Yeah. And I remember the first day we did it, September 12th, 1994, a team owner in baseball called up, and I left a message for Jeffrey Pollock and said, "I love what you just did. There's no way you're going to be able to do that tomorrow, though."
Really?
And, yeah, it was like a challenge. And like, we said, all right, because he just thought that like, all right, you put all this news together for one day, but there's not enough news for 2 days. And we just kept going every day. So it was fun.
Good for you. Good for you. And then the conference business, we talked about it, Abe, and I know there's you're getting hit by that. You guys have done a phenomenal job with the conferences. I attend multiple ones every year, World Congress being one that has always been my highlight and my favorite. But that's been a big part of your business as you evolved there. And I think you acquired, if I'm not mistaken, a company along the way and melded them into your profile. But you've done a great job at conferences and strategic. So you talk about the three pillars, right? The conference, the publication, and the advertising.
Yeah, those are our revenue streams. Advertising and sponsorship across print products, digital products, events, conferences, registration, and then our circulation revenue. There's other forms of revenue that we have coming in, Scott, but those are the three pillars, right. And they're pretty balanced. And we started conferences in the early 2000s, around 2001 or 2. And I'll be honest with you, people think that the conferences are like a huge moneymaker and drive our business. They're really not. The margins are okay, but they're hard to do. and the margins are just okay. Like as you've been to our events, we put them on at nice places. So the expenses are often quite high. A lot of times you're working at we put them a lot of times hotels and cities where they're just high cost of
Yeah.
doing business.
Yeah.
So the conference business, though, is a great business for us as a brand to be in. It's great for our reporters to be mixing with speakers and people like you to trade off information. It's great to bring brands together as sponsors and as exhibitors at our events. So it's a nice business to be in, but I've always been told, like, oh, you're really a conference company. We're really not. We're a news and information company, but conferences are a nice part of our business, but they're really hard to do well. That's why you see a lot of events come and go, because they're hard to do.
They are. And again, not to scale it or compare it. When I was at the NHL for the 10 years I was there, we put on the league marketing meetings, which became 500, 600, 700 people. And they were a lot. I mean, I could have done that full time.
Yep.
My team and I, and there were many others at the league that helped. But so I have an appreciation, that was once a year, not 11 or 12 times a year like you guys are doing. So
yeah, they are hard.
A lot of work. And then the 40 under 40, I mean, really the benchmark. Abe, you guys have done a great job of that. I mean, that's that's a badge of honor in our industry. You've been doing it, I don't know how many, 15 or more years, 20 years maybe now. And that is, I think if you're named in the 40 under 40, that's something that I think is a career highlight for most, for all. How'd that evolve? I mean that's too broad, but I mean
we took and I'll give a real credit to who deserved the idea. I don't know if you remember a reporter we used to have, Andy Bernstein.
Sure.
Yeah, he used to cover media and hockey at one time. He is now working for a vote advocacy group. He's a really bright person, but he saw this idea of 40 under 40 because 40 under 40 was in different publications and in different segments. And his idea was like, why don't we just do this for sports? And it was a great idea. And so Andy deserves the credit to bring it to Sports Business Journal. And we've been doing it. It's an arduous process. I like it. I can't say I love it. It's hard. Like, you disappoint people.
Well, yeah, that's a part.
Don't make it. And I know people who have worked their entire professional young career to be on the list. I'll go out into the market and people come up to me and say, like, it's my goal to be on your list someday, which I love to hear, but it's also tough because we really do try to have a pretty high bar of people who make the list, who we think are going to be in this business for a long time and really be the ones that people look to as setting the agenda. But it's great to recognize these people. And when you go through the alumni, we've really picked some great people who are still in the business, and we've made a few maybe we misfired a couple times, but we're not perfect.
How many nominations or applicants are you getting on average every year?
So on a normal year, we'll get north of 500, and we'll have to get that down to 40. So I mean, it's hard.
It's tough. Hard. It's tough. And then one of my favorite events, Abe, is the Sports Business Awards. And I know, unfortunately, that's fallen on a timeline and a cancellation, but that's one of my favorite events. I love going there. It's a great networking. You got all the key players, very competitive. Who's going to get selected? You guys deserve a lot of credit for that. I'm not trying to be overly gratuitous. That's just a fun event.
It is. I will say that that one was created by, I wanted to create the Oscars of the sports business, and we're in year 10. We will do the awards this year. They may not be a live event. We're still trying to sort through that. Good. But they've morphed into really, like you say, that room, Scott, that room that we have together in New York is like, sometimes we have 5 commissioners, and, no question. The room is one of the highlights of the year.
You got everybody there. I mean, because look at it. We've all, say this, we all got egos, some bigger than others, but we all take pride in the work we do, right? So everybody in that room is prideful, and you're getting the big players there to, see if they're ultimately going to be named the award winner in their category. So.
And yeah, you're right. And to see when the winners like stick around and party and jump up on the stage, and then we've had people who didn't win who storm out angry. So it's been interesting to watch the development of that event.
So we'll wrap up with this, which I like to do with everybody, and it perhaps, I'm fortunate to talk to a lot of very successful people, yourself included, Abe. But if you look back on your nearly 30 years, 25 plus years, what would and perhaps tough, what's your highlight? What would be your greatest accomplishment in your career to date, and that you would hang a hat on and say, if I can be remembered, it would be this?
That's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of notes I get where like people go to an industry event like the Sports Business Awards and like, give us credit for like, look what you guys have developed. I mean, you've developed something that the industry really aspires to win and be a part of. I guess the thing I'm most proud of is, for 25 years, Scott, through different variations, like I'm not going to lie, this Sports Business Daily was no sure thing to make it.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey worked really hard and he was in the business for about 2 years before he moved on. But like we've had 3 or 4 different owners. We've had 3 or 4 different locations, and I've been on each one of them and, kind of kept staff together and kept the publication together. And then, integrating that with the journal and really just trying to be a voice for the industry where people can learn and educate each other and network amongst each other and learn about each other. I mean, that would be something I'm probably the most proud of, is to feel like, I've stuck at it and I've kept grinding with great people here at SBJ and SBD to build something that people rely on either every day or every week or every year at a conference or an award show. So that's what I'm really, really proud of.
Well, as you should be. The consumption level, I mean, I, like thousands of others, I love the morning buzz. You get the daily and the midday, although I often read the daily at the end of the, I'm home at night.
Right.
The closing bell, you got the global. You've done a great job, as you touched on earlier, and I apologize for the brand, but your wrap up of COVID at the end of the day and how good, that's a must read. And that, I think you guys have done a great job of that. So you should be proud. I've been lucky to call you a friend, Abe, and somebody that's been around, always been very, very kind to me and everybody in the industry. So I wish you continued success. Tough times for us all. And I know you talked about your revenue crunches on a couple of your businesses, but I wish you well and hope we come out of this stronger than ever, but going to be a challenge for sure.
It's going to be a challenge for all of us. We got to be there for each other. We got to be good partners for each other. We got to help each other. And, you've always been great in helping me. And, I think that you've had a spirit of helping everyone in the business like me. I think that we're lucky to be in this, but you're right. It's not going to be easy. You and I both know a lot of people who aren't working anymore. So we got to be there for them. But you're right. We'll get through this. It's not going to be without pain, but we'll get through it. I do have to ask you one question.
Sure.
The photo behind you. Is that a Lakers game versus Sonics? No, who is that?
No, you know what that is? Long story short, I worked for the Lakers as a young kid. I was actually a ball boy for the Lakers when I was 12 years old. And that's a shot that my wife found here on the East Coast. I'm from Los Angeles originally, of Lakers-Knicks finals in 1972, autographed by all the Knicks. I still am a Laker fan. But I'm sitting, the irony, and again, it's not about me, I'm sitting underneath the basket.
Oh, you are?
So it's kind of a fun thing where I'm in the picture as a ball boy. It's, I don't know what game of that 1972 series was, but so that's fun. And
I love it.
Something my wife picked up.
Very cool. Cool to be in a ball boy at that age. That's
awesome. It's some great stories and some phenomenal experiences as a young kid, 11, 12, 14, 15. It was pretty fun.
Well, I know you're a California cool guy, so that's good. Yeah.
I've been here a long time now, so
I know.
I've lost some of my California coolness, I guess. But Abe, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Stay safe. Keep doing your great work, and look forward to talking to you throughout the process.
Awesome. Let's be there for each other. Talk to you. Thanks for having me.
All right, Abe. Thank you.
Bye.